What's going on? It's your boy DameSmiff, and we're gonna have a quick chat about what's going on in Washington D.C. with Donald Trump and him sitting in the National Guard. Now, we're just gonna take a quick surface level glimpse at it because I just wanted to tap into it so that artists and musicians kind of understand the effects of this and also understand how to deliver information in a sense, and so we can learn how to learn and basically learn how to think. We're not going to make a decision, we're not going to make a judgment, we're just going to observe, right? And so if you like conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button so that way other people can find it on the algorithm, and then make sure you hit the subscribe button so that way you can catch my latest video. So lately we've been hearing a whole bunch of controversy and conversations about whether or not it's moral or ethical to send in federal troops to essentially clean up Washington, D.C. So we're going to take a little bit of a sneak peek of the facts here, and I'm going to use our good friend. Hold up. You know him. I know him. It's your boy. He's been in the game for a long ass time, and we all love him. It's your boy. Where'd he go? Where'd he go? Where's he at? Oh, why is he not here? Hold up. Let's pull him up. I lost him. We are looking for... Oh, I know why. Aha. Boom. It's Jim Nizzle. My dog. Okay. So we're going to use Gemini basically as a tool, right? And this tool is essentially just going to be to just deliver us information, okay? And we're gonna put him. I like Gemini being a female, low key. So we're gonna put her right back here. Hold on. I'm trying to get creative on the fly, y'all. That's what makes this show so tight. Okay. So let's ask Gemini. So what has happened in DC with the National Guard? And let's just be super simple. And the cool thing about Gemini and using AI as a tool in general, especially for musicians, is that it streamlines basically the systems. Okay, it's not going to think for me, it's just going to lay out the information, and then I can filter through it with my human brain and figure out what's right and what's wrong. And if I get it wrong, I got it wrong, right? So let's see. President Trump has ordered the deployment of the National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. as part of a federal operation to address what he has called a crime emergency. This move has been met with legal challenges, public protests, and criticism from D.C. officials, including Mayor Bowser. So here's some key points. Deployment and mission. The operation began with the activation of approximately 800 members of the National Guard from DC. They have been assigned to tasks such as patrolling landmarks, providing a visible presence to deter crime, and assisting law enforcement with crowd control. So let's stop right there. So this is what they've been assigned to do. Okay. Patrolling landmarks. If you've ever been to DC, I'm from Prince George's County. I've been to DC, duh, right? And if you've ever been there, basically the landmarks are going to be like the National Mall, Smithsonian, all those cool places. And landmarks essentially are going to be places that are federally owned buildings. So if you're basically around the White House, most of those buildings are federally owned, if not the large, huge landscape architectural things like that. So the issue is that they're going to run into when you're patrolling the landmarks is that there's going to be foot traffic there from people that aren't necessarily from DC. And here's how you know. Locals in DC know that there's a certain time of day when that whole area just kind of just shuts down. And I know this because I was a musician in DC and we would busk into the late night. And it wasn't until right around, I would say about like 7 or 8 o'clock p.m. where most people would move to the residential sides of Washington, D.C. or the U Street party, red light district side of things. So when we were walking around U Street and things like that, that's where it was active. When you went to downtown, like in the middle of DC, it's quiet. You'll see maybe a couple cars passing by, maybe a little bit of homeless and things like that, right? So if they're patrolling areas like that and you happen to be there, it's a higher risk for you to be, questioned, possibly searched, especially if you don't look like you there lost as a tourist or something like that, right? So I'll give you an example. We were probably like 4 or 5 musicians promoting music walking through Washington, D.C. We had like hoodies, jeans, and things like that. And we had flyers in our hands and cell phones and stuff like that. But as we're walking and talking all loud. Now, the reason I'm describing these things, because these are the things that police officers are trained to look at least from the public's understanding. They're supposed to look at who you are, figure out kind of a little bit who you are, make assumptions, and then kind of gather their own judgment. And so with that, we look totally different than like one lone man in a hoodie with his hoodie up, walking by himself late at night, just kind of strolling at like 9, 10 o'clock at night. He's just kind of strolling. Now, mind you, he's not doing anything illegal. He's not doing anything wrong, but he is a little out of place for what's considered a local person. You know what I'm saying? So that's where police have to be aware. Now, I know most people hate that, but it is what it is, because usually creeps are creepy. It's in the name. And then the next thing is providing a visible presence to deter crime. So there was this one saying I've heard, and it was weird. I think I heard it in a video game of all places, and it was like the sight of police doesn't bring. I'm butchering this. It was like the sight of safety doesn't make you feel safe. So like when you see like all the guns and the lasers and the bombs and the grenades prepared and ready to go, armed, ready to activate and do what they're supposed to do, that shit is scary. But if you don't know it's there and everything just feels nice, then you're good. It'd be like going to a concert and everything was great and you didn't really realize the strategy of like the flow of the crowd and things like that, the safety of like having all the cameras and watching out for pickpocketers and having a lost and found or insurance and all that stuff. Like if you don't have to think about that stuff, it's not as stressful. So what that then does is it does create a bit of a like alarm for people who don't have a awareness for crime and things like that. So people who thought things were like, oh, it's fine here, suddenly start seeing police walking around. They're going to be like, okay, now the police are here, I don't feel safe because they're here to protect me from something. Whereas they could have a mindset of, okay, the police are here, I feel safe, but that's not necessarily when the police show up. So they usually show up when there's like something going on. Like if the police were just out and about in our culture, they probably wouldn't feel this way, but we don't have that relationship with police. So I do see the controversy there. The next thing it says, assisting law enforcement with crowd control. So that would mean if there's for whatever reason, the actual local police need to use crowd control tactics, they can join in. So they basically are boosting the power of the local police. And those are pretty much I guess you could say on the basic level, what they're supposed to be doing. Now the problem I think most people are going to have with this looks different from each pair of eyes that lands on this. So like for a lot of people, they think patrolling landmarks means just walking around telling people or reporting what you see. That might not be patrolling for the National Guard. And then for other people, providing a visible presence to deter crime in one person's mind might be just standing there. That's a visible presence, So this is kind of where you got to use your context clues and your common sense and things like that to kind of understand what's going on, or maybe learn a little bit more about how policing works and things like that. Because it could be easy to kind of like come up with arguments against this stuff and it not really work because you're not digging deep into what really makes this an actual tactic for their occupation, right? And then I even talk about like assisting law enforcement with crowd control. That doesn't necessarily mean when it gets bad, like not as a last resort. It literally just means assisting. And this, it's not verbatim, but let's say this is what we're looking at, And so it continues to say the White House has stated that the troops will not be making arrests, but will be protecting federal assets and providing a safe environment for law enforcement officers who are. So if they're assisting law enforcement with crowd control, pretty much all the arrests are going to be made by the local police. out-of-state troops. In addition to the DC National Guard, several Republican governors have authorized the deployment of their state's National Guard troops to Washington at the Trump administration's request. So basically, the president's administration asked for more troops from other Republican governors, or probably governors in general, but I'm sure the Republicans, being Republicans, felt more inclined to do so. And they did it. And so as of now, it states that including West Virginia, South Carolina, Ohio, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee, they've committed over 1,100 additional troops to the 800 that's there. So now they have 1,900 troops potentially walking around Washington, D.C., patrolling and enforcing with the local law enforcement. That's pretty interesting. Now, I think the only issue that people could ever come up with is that it's being a Republican governor is probably, they'll probably see some kind of like nepotism in that. But again, if you think about just on a common sense level, if you have a Republican administration, it kind of makes sense for, the Republicans to have an agenda they all agree on. Now, the only issue you should have with this is whether or not the results bring forth what you voted for. Because you don't necessarily have to be a Republican to vote for a Republican. You could just see that they have, whatever you want going on. Like if you agree with this, you don't necessarily have to be a Republican to agree with it. So just keep that in mind, Be very, very conscious of that. And then it continues to say controversy and legal challenges. The development and the administration's plan to federalize the city's police department have been highly contentious. DC officials have challenged the move in court, arguing that it is an overreach of power and unnecessary. As official data shows, crime rates in the city have been dropping. There's something interesting about this statement here that I've been hearing a lot of people say, and we'll get into that in a moment. There are also concerns about the legal basis for deployment and the role of military in domestic law enforcement. And then there's protests and arming of the troops and things like that. Those two things are not as important, but I do want to get into the federalization of the city's police department and where's the other one? Oh, official data shows that crime rates have been dropping. So let's get into the crime rate thing first, and then let's get into the federalization, because one thing happened before the other. Okay, so let's ask Gemini. I'm not even gonna just try to just make up things for you. I'm just gonna ask, and then we'll think. Okay, we'll just think. We won't just ponder. So what I want to ask it is that how has crime reporting changed in DC for the past, let's say, 20 years? How has crime reporting changed in the past 20 years for Washington, D.C.? Now, the reason I want to look at this is because the things I've been hearing is that there has been a difference in how they're reporting crime. And I had this conversation with a teacher from D.C. who it kind of was like an eye-opening conversation for them, where like we started to realize that some of the police officers that we knew, they knew the locals, but there was a kind of understanding with the locals to where a lot of crime doesn't really have to be reported because it would be resolved, right? You could have an argument between two neighbors and then a police officer shows up. He knows both neighbors. They have a conversation and then they're good. The issue that you'll run into is that kind of connection with your neighborhood can bleed into deeper issues depending on how comfortable the culture is with the crime. So like one neighborhood could be cool with like HOAs skimming over the top, taking extra money, right? But another neighborhood could be cool with like gun running, just like running pistols. And so there's levels to it. And I think what happens is over time, which we're about to get into, different crimes become popular and different things in culture become popular. And so how we look at crime changes over time. So like what you thought was like crazy, like our parents and grandparents, for those born in the 90s, probably thought like smoking weed was like insane. Like they thought you were gonna, your eyes were gonna fall out your head. Today's parents, like if your kid was born in like 2011 or something like that, like you probably smoke weed. Honestly, like you probably do. And so it looks different when you see people committing a crime. And so it just changes over time. So let's see how it changed and see if the crime rates really went down or if they changed how we report it, which is what most locals are claiming. So it says crime reporting in Washington, D.C. has changed significantly over the past 20 years, which is what I expected, reflecting both shifts in crime trends and how those crime trends are measured and presented. Here's a breakdown of the key changes. So, overall trends. The post 1990s decline. DC's crime rates in the mid 2000s were at some of the lowest levels in decades, following the steep decline from the crack cocaine fueled crime rave of the 1980s and early 1990s. The city had earned the moniker murder capital of the U.S. in 1991 with a record 482 homicides, but saw a sustained reduction in the years that followed. So I have heard of, while I was living in PG, of the story of murder capital and things like that. And I think the issue that was going on back then was that they probably weren't as resourceful for crime solving, because it's not like people were like so soft on crime. It was that crime was so advanced probably for the time, or just moving so fast and so efficiently. The recent upswing and subsequent decline. After a long period of general decline, DC experienced a notable increase in certain crimes, particularly homicides, carjackings, and motor vehicle thefts around 2020 and 2023. So I did notice around when I was probably around high school. I was in high school around like 2008, 9, 10, 6, 8, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? And the thing is that you started to kind of see different peers getting involved in things like this. And it's subtle, like it's 1 week or maybe once a month or maybe once every other couple months or things like that. And you hear stories about people who get involved. And this is part of what I'm talking about, where we start to view crime differently. And I want this to be important to artists and musicians, because there's things that we do today as musicians that you would have never done as a musician in the past. And when it comes to things like this, like when you're talking about crimes and things like that, like people talking about just walking down the street getting gripped up by the police, like we got to understand what's changing, right? And so for some people, they thought it was normal to kind of like do wild things in your 20s, right? But then as they started to get older, it started to become like a career or like part of their identity. And so that's where you get career criminals and things like that. But the issue is that I'm pointing out that we see this early. We usually see it very young, and a lot of our usually the young men, like in their early 20s and early 30s and things like that. But oftentimes it just goes, unchecked, and then eventually something happens. So now we can continue on, and let's see what it says here. It says this increase was part of a nationwide trend in many major cities. Homicides in DC peaked in 2023 at 274. So it went from 482 to 274. It's a significant drop, as it says, the highest number in 20 years. However, in the time since, there has been a significant and unmistakable drop in reported violence. Okay. And this is the thing we need to focus on. Data from the U.S. Department of Justice and the Metropolitan Police Department, which locally they call MPD, shows that violent crime in 2024 was down 35% from the previous year. Just in 1 year, they just dropped 35% all of a sudden. And it has continued to fall ever since then up until 2025, where we are today. So that's interesting, right? So I think what had happened is that, I'm just going to guess, and is that something was identified as not as serious of a crime in 2024. And suddenly we don't have to report that as much. And my guess is, if I were to guess, it were to be theft. I think it's going to be theft. That's going to be the crime that they said probably didn't need to be reported as often or as heavily. So let's see. The rise of data driven policing and public dashboards. So increased accessibility. The public's access to crime data has increased dramatically. Instead of relying solely on annual reports, the MPD now provides real time or near real time data through online dashboards. This allows residents, journalists, and researchers to track crime trends with greater speed and detail. So I think that's really helpful because, it helps people understand how to move, business owners, how to move, and things like that. Preliminary data. The information available through these dashboards is often labeled as preliminary, meaning it's subject to change. So, like, if you hear like shooting on the southeast side, it could turn into like nothing, or it could turn into a homicide. So you never know. This can sometimes lead to different interpretations or conflicting reports as officials and analysts cite data from different time periods or using different methodologies. Like I just said, I could report, hey, there's a shooting out, and then the next day I have to report that there was an actual, like, someone hit. So that's all they mean. Focusing on specific crime categories. And this is where we can kind of figure out what happened to that 35%. So, homicides. While homicides have seen significant fluctuations, they are often a key metric for public concern and political debate. DC's homicide rate peaked at 1991, fell to historic lows in early 2010s, and then saw a major spike in 2023 before a sharp decline. So it's just been going up and down for some weird reasons, right? Specifically homicides, carjackings, and motor vehicle thefts. These specific property and violent crimes have become a major focus of crime reporting in recent years. Carjackings, in particular, saw a massive increase of over 500% between 2018 and 2023. Before a significant decline in 2025 or 2024 and 2025. This highlights how reporting has shifted to spotlight specific crimes that are heightened concern of the public. So this is kind of what I mean, where you're going to have a weird decline in 2024 and 25, but an increase of 500% between these years. Something's happening between what we're calling a carjacking theft report, or at least what we're calling worthy of a carjacking theft report. And then lastly, it says competing narratives and interpretations. Political framing. So this is one side of it. Crime reporting has become highly politicized, which is very true. I learned this probably like in high school when I was learning about all the hip hop blogs and stuff like that. And one of the conversations would come up is that why are all the hip hop blogs talking about black crime and not like crime in general, right? And that was a good point because it does shape how people view crime. And not necessarily how others view black crime, but how black people view black crime. So like a lot of times we would view black crime as common and normal and just kind of what I'm explaining here as culturally sound. So for example, driving while smoking weed is a crime, but a lot of us do and have done and don't think anything is wrong with that. So things like that become kind of normal. And so you can politicize it when you can target an entire group of people like that, or you can target an entire idea like that. And the only reason it becomes a bad thing is because it can be abused or utilized to shape a certain agenda, which is what they're going to explain here. And it continues to say, officials and political figures often present data in a way that supports their agenda. For instance, some may highlight the recent crime surge to justify federal intervention, while others will emphasize the current downward trend to argue that such intervention is unnecessary and a misinterpretation of facts. So let's stop right here for a second. Others emphasize, or some may highlight that the recent crime surge justifies the federal intervention. So on a common sense level, let's ask ourselves, if there's a lot of crime and the police are asking for or not even police, your DC officials, because there's videos of DC officials literally asking for the National Guard. If they ask for the National Guard on a common sense level, does it make sense to then deploy them, right? But then on a common sense level, if no one's asking for the National Guard and crime is low and no one's saying there's a lot of crime, would it make sense to send the National Guard, right? So that's what I'm thinking, right? I don't think it would make sense to do the latter, which means that if people are saying there is a downward trend to argue that there's a downward trend to argue that such intervention is unnecessary and a misinterpretation of the facts, what are the facts, right? So they're saying there's a decline of crime right now, but they're also reshaping how we're focusing on certain crimes. So how we are reporting crimes is changing, but we're also using that same data to dictate whether or not that same level of crime is changing. So on a basic level, here's my understanding. If there's 1,000 murders in 2023, and those were all reported, and then in 2024, there was 1,000 murders again, but we decided to only report 500 of them. In 2025, would we then think that there's only a 50% amount of murders this time or in the previous year? Or would we then think that there's still 1,000 murders with 50% of them unreported? And it's hard to tell because they're fucking unreported in my example, right? So this is kind of what I think is happening. I think there's a lot of crime that isn't being reported because of how we've then changed things like the how we pursue theft and carjackings and homicides and things like that. And then we also have to think about what actually would be considered a charge or like considered justice, I guess, you know? So there's a really, really different understanding of this that for me personally, on a common sense level, I would have to see the raw data. I would have to just look at literally all the police reports or like some big chart that just explains it, and then look at why that would make sense to deploy the federal troops. Because it doesn't make sense to say that there's a current downtrend of crime when you guys are asking literally for the federal troops and the National Guard. Okay, last part, data scrutiny. So there have been allegations of book cooking, which is data manipulation, with claims from some officials that the reported statistics understate the true level of crime because many residents no longer feel it's worthwhile to report offenses to the police. This has led to a greater scrutiny of data itself and the methods used to collect it. So honestly, that means that, think about it like this. Like if you had a computer, or you have a computer, you have to have one to watch this. You have a computer, right? And it uses data to figure out what to send you, right? And just think, if the first piece of data in a line, like it just in a linear straight line, if the first piece of data was messed up or missing a piece or incorrect, do you think it would trickle down to the rest of the data that leads to, let's say, your video? And what that would look like is maybe like if this video just started buffering or if this video just froze in place, right? That's what's happening with this claim here that there's book cooking. They believe that there's some kind of manipulation going on where, because people have culturally decided that it's not worth it to report sexual assaults, carjackings, store theft, retail theft, and things like that. Like people just snag stuff and run. People, punch people in the street and just run off, or you see like unresolved murders and things like that, because people are either too scared or just don't see it worth reporting. Would you think that would corrupt how you then come to the conclusion about the crime in your city? Do you think that would corrupt it, or do you think that would lead you to see something clearly about the crime that's committed in your city? And I'll give you an example. And this is real. Like, you're probably going to see somebody relate to this. Something happens to a girl. I'll keep it vague out of respect. something happens to a girl and she doesn't say anything. She keeps it to herself. And you find out when she's like, I don't know, it's like 10 years later after it happened. For you, you're missing like a lot of information and you have a lot more questions as far as like how to console this person, how to bring any comfort to them, because you're missing time pieces, dots to connect it when they have everything, right? Now think of it in reverse. Something happens to you. You have everything. You know every bit of, what happened to you, how it happened, and your perspective. You would have so much clarity to the situation that it's valuable for the world, pretty much, right? But for you to bring forth this kind of information means that you have to basically reopen that wound. So that's why I use the example of something happens to a woman, right? In our minds, we're like, yeah, that makes sense. She's just gonna hold it together for 10 years. But something is missing there. Something she held it together for herself, but she knows and understands things and has a perspective that, as dark as it is valuable. And it's just like when we hear rappers, criminals, crime bosses, soldiers, veterans, and things like that. They come back and tell their stories. Warriors and stuff like that. They come back and tell their stories. They have to go through it to have the story to be able to bring truth to it. And so what happens now is we have a lot of people that have not experienced a lot of the DC culture. A lot of people that are not criminals or have no understanding of crime, because you don't have to be a criminal to understand crime, but they're not face to face with the crime or with the activity to where they have a real look at it. And that's what I was saying for myself. Like if I had the numbers in front of me and then I could just see like, okay, boom, I would call the National Guard, like then that's how I would make the decision. But because I can't make a judgment here. And that's why I was saying in the beginning. So this was a quick snapshot of what's going on in DC, okay? And next, we're going to load up a little bit of some reaction videos as far as how the news is reporting what's happening in DC, and then we can react to that in real time as well. But what I think we can learn from what we've seen so far is that the idea of the National Guard is good, but we as citizens of America have no clue what the truth is about the crime in DC. Personally, I'll give you a story. It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. If I were to tell you, I've been busking in the streets, and if you don't know what busking is, it's basically the street musicians, the people who play on the street and things like that. To be on the street playing like, jingle bells and shit like that, and you give us $1. We were out there playing like some funk music with brass instruments and a drum set. And while we were taking a break, we just kept hearing a commotion coming out of the subway. And the subway in DC is pretty chill, honestly. It's usually like nothing going on most days, but today it was like really weird. And I noticed like one guy, he looked like he was just walking to work. He was like swatting away at somebody. And it was like somebody who like got swatted at and then darted back into the subway, okay? A few minutes later, we're still playing and things like that. We're chilling. We probably spent like a good hour, maybe 2 hours out there. And we heard more commotion on the opposite side of us. So now it's on the left of us. This person is probably like he's probably like 6.5 feet tall or some shit. I don't know. He's a tall, he's not muscular, but he's like tall, lanky black guy. And he clearly looks homeless and strung out on drugs. And he's just in the street just running at people. Just literally like full sprint, like State of Decay 2, Dying Light, 28 weeks later, just like just running at people, right? And this was probably 2012, 2013. So he was probably like one of the first zombies of Fent or something like that, something crazy, or Fenty. But he was running around just grabbing people and like attacking people. So like, you know, most of us who was up and about, we was like able to back up, and he's like in the street, out the street, and he wound up grabbing one of the metro guards there. It was a young lady there. She was the security, or I guess one of the train station employees, and he's like tackling her, and like two or three guys jump on her, or not her, but jump on him and get him off of her, and then separate her, and then suddenly MPD pulls up and arrests him. But that's just us just walking in the street. I remember, you know, being mugged before. I remember being trailed, I guess you can say, if that's a thing. Like, you know, there's just a homeless guy just kind of like lurking about 40 feet behind you, but everywhere. Like, yeah. And it's something where like I said, if I don't report it, like I'm sure, well, this particular instance, it got reported because this guy got arrested. Like they had him in the street, you know, getting cuffed. But if, you know, something happens to me, like somebody just takes my phone or something and I just go home, it is what it is. And a lot of people behave like that. Like, um, the girl that got attacked, I don't know if she's gonna, you know, be a part of that. That was years ago. And then the one guy that got attacked, I don't know what happened to him. We saw the end of it. So he could have been actually hit. He could have been swung at and ducked. We don't know. But the concept of what is a crime and what to report and things like that is kind of black and white. But if we don't actually have a culture of like reporting and helping the police and things like that, it's not gonna help us get, again, clarity to the issue. Just like I said in my example of something happened to a girl and we find out what it is 10 years later, it's kind of hard for us to kind of like do something as angry as it will make us, you know, because personally I'd be pissed, I'd be heated, but you can't do anything realistically. So let's get into what we're going to react to. And this is actually Fox News talking about the national troops going into DC. So get it here. We're not talking about Chris Pratt. Get out of here, Pratt.
6 states are now sending hundreds of National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. to assist in President Trump's crime crackdown, which the president is touting as a massive success, netting nearly 400 arrests already.
We have a thing going on right now in D.C. We went from the most unsafe place anywhere to a place that now people, friends are calling me up, Democrats are calling me up, and they're saying, so I want to thank you. My wife and I went out to dinner last night for the first time in 4 years, and Washington, D.C. is safe, and you did that in 4 days.
So I really wish he would have named the Democrat right there that said that, because it would have kind of validated what he's saying, because we don't know if it's true or not. I can hear it right now. Everybody's like, we don't know if he's telling the truth. He's lying. So again, when I talk about like being able to just see things for what it is, that is a great thing that he said, but I got to take it for a grain of salt. I don't know if that's true. Some guy who is a Democrat's wife was safe. You know what I'm saying? So it is what it is.
West Virginia Attorney General J.B. McCuskey joins me now. Mr. Attorney General, thank you so much for joining us. West Virginia, of course, one of the states that's sending National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. So why is cracking down on D.C. crime important to West Virginia?
Yeah, it's not just important to West Virginia, but it's important to everybody in this country. So DC's ability to govern itself matters to every single American, because the District of Columbia isn't just a tourist destination. It's a place where the business of our country is done.
And that's one thing a lot of people don't realize. I went to school at Bowie State, and that's where I kind of got to see, like, you know, the DMV really like function, like really like hustle and bustle and things like that. Because if you go to DC, you see the glitz and glamour, but it's like the right around the edges of DC is where you see like all the business and like the people, right? And so the thing you want to understand is that DC is smack in the middle of New York, fucking South Carolina, Florida, Miami, you know? And so there's all kinds of business that has to go through DC and Delaware and things like that. From you making a business to you defending your business to you defending your personal life to you paying taxes, everything is there. So you got to keep that in mind when people are having discussions about Washington, D.C. They're not having discussions about just some regular location, some regular state. Like this place has like buildings with, underground bunkers in there, spies and like, weird shit going on. You think, it's just a place because you say it's a place, but it's not anymore. It's no longer that. It's a new thing now. It's become something else.
And we have 6,800 National Guard troops here in West Virginia. And the president has asked us to send several hundred of them into D.C. to make sure that our nation's capital is safe for the citizens of this country to do the business of this country. And Republicans are great at doing two things at once. Our National Guard has a dual role, and law enforcement very clearly fits within that role as defined in Section 32, 502F in the federal code. And so what we have here is the president asking for some help, and the people of West Virginia, as we always do, very, very grateful for the opportunity to lend a hand to make the people of D.C. safer and to make everyone who visits D.C. feel more comfortable.
Yeah, and that's the goal. What do you think?
So I got to be a little cynical here.
Yep.
As we were talking about the governors that were helping out, West Virginia and South Carolina, I can't remember the other states, Ohio, there was a couple of them on there, but Republican governors are inclined to help the Republican Party. Let's just be honest, right? So our cynicism right here is going to help us in understanding that there is, a relationship, a nature to their relationship, and he could just be nurturing it. He could clearly believe this. This is a common sense kind of belief, like protect my country. It'd be like, do you believe in hurting women? Like, who's going to say yes? And like, honestly say yes, So the people who would be saying, I don't want to agree with this on like some like official level, you would have to really, really believe that shit. And for him, it's kind of a slam dunk to just do this. So there is that. There's one side of it where it's just like, it just makes sense. You're a Republican. This is a Republican administration. Do what you're supposed to do. Do what you got to do. Do what you think is best. But then there is a conversation about, again, what does this man see in terms of the crime data of Washington, D.C.? Does he see the true crime data in Washington, D.C., or is he being relayed the information like we are,
Number that we just reported, 400 arrests made so far. Certainly can't make things less safe. What are your thoughts on that?
So I was a D.C. resident for about 10 years. I went to college in D.C. I've seen what their government can look like, and I've seen what D.C. looks like when crime is really, really bad. And the numbers speak for themselves. When you show criminals that you are willing to arrest them and that you are present in the neighborhoods where they're going to be committing crimes, not only does crime go down, but so do arrests go up, and citizens feel safer. And I think you can see that in the either affirmative conversations that the mayor and the police chief are having about this, as well as just residents in D.C. I hear it every day from people in West Virginia who work in D.C. that this has been a huge success and will continue to be so.
We also want to ask you about something entirely different, but also on the topic of safety on social media. Instagram recently changed its location sharing feature, so you and 36 other attorneys general are calling for Instagram to address this and add more safety precautions in its location sharing. So can you tell us about the change at Instagram?
We don't really care about the safety of Instagram, but pretty much the things that we're going to have to pay attention to when it comes to this is how this is going to affect what we look at when it comes to what crime is, how we look at crime in general. Because like I said, if you're going to start like reshaping how you punish criminals and things like that, you might see more crime. Then again, you might not see people report crime because they don't see a reason to, because they won't get any result. So I don't know if this man has that same information. This news anchor, as pretty as she is, she's just being a news anchor. She's just posting the information, right? So that's the thing you want to pay attention to. How clear are we? So I want to check over here at my dog, Nick Shirley, and we're going to see what's going on with him as far as what the actual residents are saying. Now, the cool thing is he's just walking up and saying, "What do you think?" And they tell him what he thinks. So let's see.
What do you guys think about the feds coming here in Washington, D.C.? I love it. I wish it was more. And how dangerous did Washington, D.C. become these past few years?
It doesn't compare to the 80s. D.C. was the murder capital of the United States. We averaged 13 bodies a day.
And you think Donald Trump's wrong for wanting to come in here and clean up the city?
Nope. No, I do not.
And why do you think there's so many people are getting upset with him coming in and wanting to take control
take control and get this city. But this is the nation's capital.
So he did say they were averaging 13 bodies a day. Mo, let me put it in perspective. If I was your mayor and I was losing 13 of y'all a day, yeah, I would send the troops. So they didn't even send the troops then, and people are pissed now.
You got tourists scared to come here.
Were the police enforcing the laws?
But it's not enough of them. They're not doing enough.
What do you think about the federal government coming in here and trying to stop you crime? I think it's a bad idea.
Because we need them to actually be stopping crime, not be stepping us on the
Okay, so do you think they're overstepping the boundaries here in Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, I mean, it's wrong on all sorts of levels. It's just dumb.
So I don't know if she understood what a criminal is, but she seemed like she was there for a different reason.
They
Let's see what
arrested
this
the
is.
guy that was selling to the homeless people. How they came by and tried to take you guys off the street?
So the previous white woman we just saw said they were rounding up the homeless people. The black man we saw said they were rounding up the criminals. In this video, we watched them take away a guy who they allege was selling drugs, which is a crime. This right here is a homeless lady. Let's see what she says.
They've been respectful. Well, that's good to hear because they just took off the drug dealer from the streets.
She said they've been respectful. They have not been aggressive. And they just took a drug dealer away from her. And I guess this man right here.
So what is the law enforcement done for you guys coming through here? Because that lady just came here, she was yelling all at the police, but meanwhile we just saw them arrest the dealer, and she's yelling at, saying that she's the only people.
They didn't say anything. They walked by respectfully. They didn't give anybody any issue.
She got the cutest voice.
You'll be angry that they just took a dealer off the street.
No, it shouldn't be. I'm happy that DC is being cleaned up. And I'm not going to blame it on racism or anything.
Did that lady wake you up?
Of course, it's a disturbance because she was provoking on purpose. And, you know, you always got people out here, they say they're for a cause, but, I mean, it's almost 11 o'clock at night. It's very peaceful. The police don't have sirens going or anything else. And they were just decently speaking to people, but there's always people that will try to cause a problem deliberately.
This is interesting because listening to her is kind of like refreshing yet kind of weird because she's so well spoken for what, you know, is stereotypical of a homeless woman. And it's kind of like you want to ask more questions as to like how she got here and things like that. But yeah, this is pretty interesting. So let me know, what do you think? Do you think there is some kind of like problem with what you're seeing in the homelessness, or not the homelessness, in the National Guard sweeping through DC and things like that? Or do you agree with what you see as far as what the locals are saying? So let me know in the comments, and I will see y'all next time. Peace.